Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Thank you so kindly being part of the show. We are going to have a great show for you today. We have our regular series, a better human story that we have. We're going to continue that series today with Dr. Schmookler, Dr. Andrew Schmookler, who will be talking about that. Bridge MCP, I just saw your message about giving credit to the person. I'll go ahead and find those areas and give credit to the. I think I saw the link. Put that into the link for that particular video that I did yesterday. Anyway, how are my peeps doing? Welcome. Bridge MCP is in the house. We also have Melanie Keelan in the house. We also have Eric Hayes in the house. Michael Rutnan is in the house. Para ver que más tengo. We also have Paul Fleming Sr. is in the house. And the one and only Yvette Avery Herod. How are my peeps doing? Well, folks, look, we are going to have a good show. I want you to listen to this stuff about the Supreme Court. It's a fairly long interview, and then we'll go into the Christie stuff, etc. I hear about the air pollution in New York coming down from Canada. I feel for you all. We get that sometimes when it blows in from Mexico. It's bad, I understand. It's equivalent to New York City. If you go outside and walk, it's like smoking 17 cigarettes is what they say. Really bad. Anyhow, I have some video on Chris Christie. Oh my God, Chris Christie really has it in for El Señor Trump, which is a good thing. But, you know, Christie ain't no saint. Chris Christie is just going wherever the money is. Let's see, can I read that? Yep, I can read that just fine. I have my new glasses on. Let's see what it sounds just awful. I'm sorry. Yes, it is really bad in New York, and Bridge is going through it being in upstate New York. Michael Ronin said, if you got to go outside in this, wear a mask. Get all those particulates out of the air that you're breathing. Actually, the N95 will take care of those particulates. I don't know about what's the level of CO2. I don't think that is a big issue. I think the big issue is the particulates, that stuff that you see stopping the sunlight from shining, etc. But anyhow, let's see if I have anything else I want to say before I start the video, because like I said, the video is fairly long. So if anybody wants to say anything real quickly, let me know now. Got 30 seconds to say that. And then we're going to begin with the good old video. But he says we are closer to Canada. So it's really bad upstate New York. People wearing masks. Eric says just sneeze and blow your nose. It's a lot worse than that, Eric. It's a lot worse than that. Audio is good. Great. I'm glad that audio is good. Okay. Let's go ahead and get busy. E2247 is also in the house. Roberto Lewis says, saludo mi gente. Politics Done Right. How you doing, Roberto? Since I have Roberto on the line here, I want to give my brother some good kudos. Let me tell you what's great about having great brothers and sisters, family like Roberto. Roberto said he needed to get Ashley away from her parents. So Roberto took Ashley to Cancun, Mexico for the weekend, and they had a wonderful time. She came back all refreshed, not having been under the guises of her, she's a grown woman. And, it doesn't, I know she wants to get away from here sometimes. And thank you, Roberto, so kindly for giving my daughter that hell of a time along with your family in Cancun, Mexico. That was wonderful. Anyway, folks, I got to move on here. Let's see if I need to salute anybody else before I go. A case study on how to disrupt disinformation. There was a good piece on Morning Joe today where it's about not shutting it down, but kind of instructing people on how to be smart. So let's go ahead and play the video, and then we'll come back with Chris Christie and all the other stuff. So without further ado, here we go. Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Today, we are honored once again, continuing our series, A Better Human Story. With us today is Dr. Andy Schmookler, PhD, a prize-winning author, former Democratic candidate for Congress in Virginia's very red Shenandoah Valley, former talk radio host, summa cum laude, graduate of Harvard University, PhD award with distinction in a program specially created to accommodate his original theory explaining how civilization has developed, and a frequent columnist in newspapers throughout our country. Welcome to Politics Done Right, once again. Dr. Schmookler, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay.
Well, as a part of this series, today we're kind of coming to reality with regards to the battle between democracy and fascism in America. And how is it represented within our Supreme Court? Your thoughts?
Well, we have a crisis about the Supreme Court, and the American public apparently is aware that there's problems, but they're more profound than the way we're generally talking about them. There's a lot of awareness about the sort of the smell of corruption of an ordinary sort with Justice Thomas and his billionaire benefactor. And in my mind, that's a symptom of things that are much more of the moral bankruptcy. But in the larger picture, the nature of the battle over the Supreme Court is shown by the fact that this court is, I believe, unprecedented in its being essentially an extension of a political party, and rather than a representative of the force of the rule of law. And this can be documented by looking at their decisions, which I think are conspicuously bad law. And so let me just say a little bit about me and my ability to judge this sort of thing. I'm not a constitutional scholar. If we could get Jamie Raskin or Lawrence Tribe to, comment on what I would say, but I think they would basically agree, because back in college, I took a course in constitutional law. Wonderful course, the only lecture course that was ever wonderful, from the guy who wrote the book, and I fell in love with the history of the Constitution. This was back in the 60s. And so it was sort of a golden age where the court was doing a lot of wonderful things, like striking down Jim Crow, saying that every criminal defendant has a right to be represented by counsel, and countless other decisions. It was, but the history was a mixture of justice and injustice. There were past times when the Supreme Court did scandalous things. The slave power had its way on the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which helped lead the way to the Civil War. The same issue of representing white supremacy. The court did in 1896 in a decision called Plessy versus Ferguson, where they adopted the obvious fiction of separate can be equal, consigning African Americans to second-class citizenship for another more than a half century. So there are dark times, but I don't think there's ever been a court that, on issue after issue, acts as an instrument of the Republican Party that put them there. We don't have these Republicans, they've been groomed to be partisans. So we don't have a suitor appointed by a Republican, but who became more liberal as he sat on the court. And George Stevens, even more so, appointed by, I think, Ford. But anyway, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I've been paying attention to this stuff for a long time, including these days. And what we can see with the Republican Party and the Republican court is they have made themselves part of a fascistic force. It's not just that they represent a party finding some harebrained way of justifying coming up with a conclusion that the Republican Party wants on guns or on abortion, whatever. Not only that, but they come up with arguments that just don't hold water. And in one case, a couple years ago, there were sort of back-to-back decisions in which they used one way of looking at what should be given weight to reach one conclusion, but rejected that way of looking at it to reach the other conclusion. I don't remember what the details were on that one, I'm sorry. But even before we had this 6-3 majority, the complete lack of integrity at a moral level of this court could be found with the Republican 5-4 majority pre-Trump in things like the voting rights decision that in Citizens United that actually comes out and says the absurdity, the patent absurdity, that all this money isn't going to have any influence on elections or on policy, that it's perfectly safe to open the floodgates to money. I mean, they're not stupid. They're corrupt. They're morally bankrupt to be able to say that about what they were doing, opening those floodgates. Any fool would know that what they were saying was false, and they're not fools. And then the Voting Rights Act was another one back from the same era when Obama.
Section 4, yeah.
That there had been certain protections in place that had been put there in order to protect African Americans from the impulse of the white power structure to essentially disenfranchise them. It was known, and there were, it's such an ugly history after the Civil War of what was done to rob African Americans of their voice in states that had been part of the Confederacy. And so there were things set up to make sure that any changes that they make in their voting system would be looked at by the Justice Department to make sure they were not racially, whatever the word was, I don't know.
Biased.
So in the recent decision stripping that stuff away, the court once again says what they'd have to be fools to believe, that these states, we don't need to provide these protections anymore. That was for an earlier time. As soon as they took those protections away, North Carolina and Texas almost overnight, started trying to disenfranchise the people that the Jim Crow regime always tried to keep from having a voice. So these are examples, first of all, of the nature of the things that they work toward. It's not like they're partisans, but they're trying to make the world better. They are partisans, and they are partisans for a party that's basically fascistic in nature, that it comes second nature to destroy the democracy by disenfranchising Black people and by giving the plutocracy more and more power.
Now, interestingly, Professor,
Go ahead. That's a good stopping point.
This is a curious thing, because I think they're also doing severe damage to the structure, the structured manner in which decisions are made. Because what we've seen with the last several decisions is they pretty much thrown precedents out the door, and in doing so, it seems like what it creates is not sort of a laissez-faire Supreme Court, but a body of laws that no one can take seriously any longer, because it has no staying power going forward. Today, maybe
it's not credible.
Something else.
It's just a rationalization for power. It's just raw power operating. It's not the rule of law. I mean, the rule of law does not justify what they did in those cases we were talking about. The rule of law would, and the Second Amendment, for example. I mean, I remember when Nixon appointed Chief Justice, what was his name? Warren Burger. After he was Chief Justice, he said He said that the position that what the framers intended with the Second Amendment was that every individual was entitled to unrestricted rights to bear arms is an absurdity. Now, I don't know if absurdity is too strong, but I am pretty sure that what this Supreme Court in Heller, a case called Heller, decided about the Second Amendment was pure fabrication. It was a misreading of the intent of the founders. The beginning of the Second Amendment is, a something or other militia being key to the freedom or whatever. It refers to militia. These people did not waste words. Militia had a meaning. Militia was on their mind when it had to do with the rights of the citizens to bear arms shall not be infringed. I think, I'm not positive about this, but I think any honest reading would say that what they've done with the Second Amendment is something like the absurdity that the Republican-appointed Chief Justice declared it to be. So they're handing down decisions as an exercise of power. That's what it is. We've got the majority. We're going to get what we want. That is the heart of the problem of civilization. We've talked about the spirit of the gangster. The rule of law was supposed to be the alternative to that. The Athenians say that the way of the world is the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Now, the whole idea of justice is that that's not to be the way things get decided. The job is to pass just laws. And of course, not only just laws get passed, but it's something. It's our best. It's the best shot we've had. We pass just laws, and then we have the law govern our conflicts. That's our best shot at solving the problem of the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Fascism is about enshrining that. It's a kind of a tyranny of the few over the many. That's what you get. The Athenians understood. If you don't have some issue of right that governs the conflicts, what we've got now in this Supreme Court is not that it's a check against power, like the law is supposed to be, but it is simply an instrument of power. And that puts we who will care about American democracy in a real dilemma. Because fascism already now owns the Supreme Court. Not necessarily permanently, but that territory has been lost by the side of the democratic forces. We could talk about why the democratic forces were not better at protecting themselves. That's a different conversation. We've had that before, actually. But in any event, fascism now owns the Supreme Court. So do we respect it? Which is the American tradition, which is fundamental to the way American democracy has been working since Marbury versus Madison established the role of the Supreme Court as being the last word. They get the last word. And they don't have an army to enforce it, but what they've got is our willingness to respect it. But we can't respect it now. Not when they...
No.
Okay.
Well, when you talk about we can't respect it now, first of all, I think the Supreme Court is, we've for some time talked about the three legs of the government, the three what is it called?
Branches.
The three branches of government,
checks and balances,
and their co-equal branches, etc. They're not really. 9 people have the power to put anyone in check, and the only recourse is impeachment, which in a polarized country is almost impossible. So
it was set up in the hopes that the process I mean, you need to have somebody who has the last word. So the question is, how do you set up a government where you get elected presidents, elected members of Congress who have powers, but we save ourselves from the abuse of powers? And they set up this thing where the president's supposed to nominate somebody. The Senate is supposed to advise and consent and then vote on whether that person, it's the best they could come up with to create what they envisioned. In the absence of God coming, giving us messages on Mount Sinai, this is supposed to be the best thing we can do to fill an absolute need, which is to decide what does the law allow.
But interestingly, what the Supreme Court has become is just another branch of Congress, right? I mean, if you take a look at it, given that it's now political, it's really not a third and independent branch.
Well, the branches are not quite relevant here. I mean, they're not centrally relevant. They've perverted a branch, what's supposed to be a branch, which has its own safeguards and such. They've made it into part of a force. So between Trump and the Trump party and these 6 Republican appointed justices, there is a coherent force, which is the force of fascism, which basically owns the Republican Party. Didn't used to, but over the last generation, it is a great graduate. And we've talked about that in the past, you and I. This has become an unprecedented political party, and it has given us an unprecedented Supreme Court that is not worthy of being given the respect that our democracy tells us we're supposed to give it.
But interestingly, let me challenge you now, because for too long, I think we have been singing glory, glory, hallelujah to the perfection of our 3 branches of government, checks and balance and all of that. And I think we've fooled ourselves for so long that we started to believe what we were saying, not realizing that to hold these 3 branches of government, the expectation was that there were gentle people. We used to say just gentlemen, but that there were gentle people who were going to hold up the end of the bargain, but not realizing that within the letter of the law proper, the demise of these systems are present. And I think until we come to that realization and acceptance that the demise of our system is actually written within the Constitution, written within our laws.
I don't buy that.
That in itself is a problem. Well, we're living it.
Well, let me say this about that. You know that my better human story is sort of comprehensive. Yeah. It takes a look at the huge dilemma a species will face, unanticipatable, if it crosses into civilization, if it leaves the natural order. So, from my perspective, the history of human civilization is filled with a lot of darkness and ugliness. And, and I say the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. That's one of my biggest points I want to get across. So in that context, where you see our system as being sort of inherently corrupt, yeah, I mean, everything I see in the history of civilization is deeply flawed in terms of power relations. But if you look at, say, how American society has unfolded, and the kind of society, for example, that my grandparents came to, leaving the lands ruled by the Tsar to come to the shores of the United States of America, like millions of other people from various parts of the world. You see, what I see is, deeply flawed though it has been, the United States operating with its 3 branches of government, we're actually pioneers in moving civilization forward in a very important way. Doesn't deny that we had slavery as a corrupt part of our system from the beginning and never have fully dealt with it. It doesn't obviate the fact that we dealt with the Native Americans here in a way that was completely like what the Athenians said: the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. I recognize all that darkness, but still, in the spectrum of human societies that we have had in this deeply flawed civilizational system in which the spirit of the gangster has played a predominant role, this has been really pretty good. The world can look to this as having turned over a page where the powers of the government were more an expression of the will of the people than they had been for millennia.
Okay, I beg to differ, but that's beside the point. I think what's important for us to, and I'd like you to address this, because my contention is that almost by design, we are always we somewhat deify our founders, right? Not realizing that it was really some sort of a compact among gentlemen, and I can use that now, a compact around gentlemen who had a particular way that they thought gentlemen acted. Now, that said, I think it is important to see all the flaws, and recognizing the flaws is the only thing that can save us. Let's give some examples that could be fatal. Okay, if we take a look at how we've allowed things like gerrymandering to take away democracy, we look at things how an electoral college takes away democracy. If we look at all these, if we look at how the Supreme Court can be used to take away democracies, these are all fundamental parts of the structure of how we were created. But let's go a bit further. The American people proper are good people, are honest people. If you take a look and you poll the American people would say the things that the majority of the American people now would say the things that we want, but they are held bent backwards by this document and following this document. Again, I bring up the three big ones: gerrymandering, electoral college, and Supreme Court. They are holding us back, and they're ensuring that we don't have a real democracy, but that we have the what you talk about, the powerful.
Well, again, I will say the important distinction to be made is that we once had a reasonably secure system, which, with all its flaws, nonetheless created a society that people came from Ireland and Italy.
Doctor, I need to interrupt you a second, because I think too often, in my opinion, too often we relegate the evils that we've done to just, well, we made a few mistakes.
You misread me if you think that.
Wait, hold on. I really need to get this one out, because I think to our audience, our audience is an audience of many, audience that sees it in many different directions. And I think it's important for us not to look at our audience and say, well, we had this great document, we had this great system, except for we had slavery, except for we genocidally killed the Indians, except for we brought over Chinese and created all these exceptions as we are a great people, or we are better than everybody else. You know, we at some point, for the others that have gone through that suffering, one is going to have to say, well, you can say that, well, maybe we're great, but the other people that the but occurs to wasn't all that great. Continue, my brother.
Well, you started this show with the saying about the battle between democracy and fascism.
Right.
I've written about all those shortcomings. The Electoral College, I don't think I sent you that piece, but just a month ago, I had a piece in the newspapers about it. And the thing is that the central challenge of this moment is not between the kind of problems of that America, whatever year you might want to choose, you could look and say there are all these kinds of profound things wrong. But we I grew up with Eisenhower I knew Truman was president, but I didn't know much about it. But I go back a long way, and there was a different situation in the country in terms of whether the United States was going to be a democracy in the future or whether it was going to become a fascistic or authoritarian state. That question has arisen over the course of the past generation. I've been working on it full time. The issue, the issue that we face is how do we defeat this force? That's job one at the moment. To even get back to the level of corruption as we had in the 1950s or something like that, which is plenty. But so to me, the reason we're talking about the Supreme Court now is it has become a more profound threat to the future of American democracy than I think that it has ever been. When it was the instrument of the slave power, it wasn't like across the board completely indifferent to the law, at least not my understanding of the history. It was on that issue. It was an instrument of a ugly partisan force. But this one opens the door. It hurts every time they make a decision. They're hurting us from our efforts to go in a good direction. What they did to the Clean Water Act just within the last couple of weeks. They seem to go out of their. I mean, I don't know if they're going to gut the ability of the EPA to deal with climate change, but people have fears. And people have fears of a variety of decisions they might make that will disenfranchise people. Every place you look, from Roe v. Wade to guns, and there's this whole darkness, which is, when you look at fascistic powers. Well, they say Mussolini made the trains run on time. I don't know if he did or not. And that is a good thing. I mean, I don't like waiting at a train station either. But in general, whatever the fascistic force wants to do in the society makes it worse. Drumming up hostilities toward vulnerable groups of people. That's one of their perennial tricks, So we've got that battle across the board. And the Supreme Court is a combatant on the wrong side. So how do we deal with it? Do we give it respect because that's what Americans are supposed to do? That's a part of our culture that we give it respect. Or do we go to war against the fascistic force in that arena?
In what regards go to war? What do you mean?
Well, there's a congressman that I have had the privilege of advising. And I regard this guy as being the most powerful voice in the Congress for defending democracy and denouncing fascistic forces. Not necessarily using that word, but, I would like to see this fellow, whom I have the greatest regard for, up the magnitude and boldness of his voice. I mean, I've been denouncing this court in certain language here about this is bad law, this is corrupt. I'm not mincing words. I'm talking about a picture of the court. What if this fellow were to step up and use his platform and his eloquence and not just wait for them to do something, but to take the campaign out into the country? We've got a problem with the Supreme Court. This Supreme Court is not playing the function that the Supreme Court's supposed to be playing. That would be the first thing, is to bring that issue up into a public awareness to whatever extent it could. And to do it by creating events that get media attention and having eloquent words to show in language that Americans, in some general way, might be able to process. I'm not saying it's easy, but as far as you could go in being bold while still being effective, that would be the criteria. And then once the issue has been kindled in people's minds. Yeah, we got a problem with the court. I mean, nobody's going to be able to do anything about the court right now, like pass judicial ethics. The Republicans would probably not let it come to a vote in the Senate. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the more the public gets activated about the issue, we've got a problem with the Supreme Court, the more room there is for the Democrats to start taking actions, political actions. I mean, people talk about adding more people to the court, which apparently, the Constitution doesn't say you can't do that.
Yeah, it's legal. Yeah.
And I was reading recently about FDR's attempt to pack the court, which was condemned at the time. And I've known that for a long time. Like one of the big mistakes FDR made, he made 3 big mistakes in 1937. One of them was trying to pack the court. I'm not clear just why it was a mistake. But anyway, people say it was. But if the public is behind, we got to solve this problem. We don't want to give the last word to people who are morally bankrupt and are dishonest in their rendering of the so-called rendering of the law, which is really just the expression of a partisan interest. There are various things, not just adding more justices to the court. There's also people talk about, kicking people off after 10 years, or anyway, there are various proposals, and I don't claim to know what the right strategy would be. But I do think that you got to make the American public care about it to see what's at stake. If the last word about the meaning of the Constitution is given to a fascistic set of people who've been appointed by a fascistic party, I think it becomes more possible we can actually win the battle in the Supreme Court. In addition to my being more optimistic about beating fascism at the polls in 2024, but that's another story.
Well, it seems to me like what you're saying is if we bring some democracy into the fold with respect to the Supreme Court, and in effect, what I think that says is, I'm not even sure we need a Supreme Court. I mean, it's codified into the Constitution now, but I'm not at this point in time. The Supreme Court, as you mentioned in the document that you sent here, is nothing but an appendage of the party. So if it's an appendage of the party, what's its use? Because
but the thing is, but we need to have something that gets to get the last word about a conflict. I mean, there has to be somebody, what if Congress says the Constitution means this and the president says the Constitution means that? How do you resolve that? You have to have someone, so
elections.
Well,
elections. It's true democracy.
You can't always wait for the next election. And, like the Civil War was about the law. We had a conversation about this. The South was not willing to abide by somebody deciding the issue of whether they had a right to secede. We talked about that. It's a lawless act. The President of the United States says you have no right. They claim to have the right. You don't settle that by war. This is the thing. It's supposed to be an alternative to raw power. We're not supposed to have 10,000 bodies stacked up at Antietam or Shiloh or Gettysburg. That's not how we're supposed to resolve it. We need somebody to have the last word. The South had a responsibility to go and say to the Supreme Court, here's our case for our right to secede, and then have the administration. Lincoln was very eloquent about why they didn't, and make that case. And then the Supreme Court decides, and either the South does not secede because they don't have the right to, or they do secede and the government of the United States accedes to it. Somebody has to have the last word. Otherwise, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must.
Professor, Doctor, I can't disagree with you. We're coming down on time here, but I want to say something to address that I hope you can close on. And that is, you're right. However, the paradigm has changed. And now that we have a changed paradigm, we're first of all, the intellect level on the Supreme Court has dropped over the years. It's no longer about understanding law. It's no longer about understanding the reason for precedents. It's no longer about what you do can actually harm. As an example, Roe v. Wade will get a lot of women killed. As an example, many of the voting right strike downs that they've had will allow further fascism to occur, as people are going to be removed from being able to vote appropriately. So the damage that they've done, it's long lasting and to some permanent. The paradigm has changed. As a last word, what can we do, in your opinion, a specific thing to do in your opinion, to make a change that can help, not in the long term, but now?
Well, first, let me just take your phrase, the changed paradigm. It seems like this sort of characterizes some of the dynamic of our back and forth here. What you are seeing as, like there was this and now there's that. And you look into the future and you want to deal with the fact that the court is that. Mm-hmm. I see it, not that there's been like one era and we've given way to a second era, but that we have lost ground and we need to regain it. So you could say that the Nazi-occupied France was a changed paradigm of French governance. I would say it is more illuminating to think of that as an occupied power that needs to be removed from power. And so what I'm eager to do is to have a restoration of the rule of law as far as we can take it, not just defeating this fascistic force that controls the court, but dealing with gerrymandering, for example. This court blocked a perfectly defensible and obviously constructive move to say that partisan gerrymandering was not consistent with the Constitution. I could make that case, and I'm not an attorney. Equal protection under the law, that would be one place I would go. But they decided, no, you can't do it on account of race, and that's leftover from a better time. But it's okay if you're going to make it so that in a state that is 50-50 Republican Democrat, you've arranged it so it'll be 65-35 in the legislature. I mean, does that seem like it's consistent with the spirit of the Constitution?
So in the short term, what do we do, Professor?
Okay. I think people clamor as much as they can for a confrontation with this court, as bold as they're willing to be. I mean, our side has never been too bold in the 25 years or 30 years I've been looking at it. We've always been less bold than the occasion calls for. That's how I see it. So I think that we could have a social movement, a political movement. As much, and one thing, this congressman that I'm talking about, I'm pitching to him that maybe we could have a way of connecting him with the following who want him to play that role, to want him to go out there and be challenging this fascistic court in whatever ways would be most effective. So that when he speaks, there's a following enough to sort of amplify, get the attention. So that's what I'm thinking of proposing to this fellow. If he's interested, then the listeners of this conversation, if they feel moved, like, yeah, I'd like to be one of those people who would make his or her presence felt in support of this campaign. But there are plenty of other places where democracy and fascism are joined. And any place that we take power away from this Republican Party is good for the survival of American democracy. But the Supreme Court is a special place because when this House of Representatives it could very well be under Democratic control in a year and a half. But the Supreme Court, when you get a court in a particular constellation, they say for a generation. So this is a battle we shouldn't be ignoring to enable people like this to get the last word on all the issues that we're going to be facing over the next generation.
Dr. NJ Schmookler, thank you once again as we continue the series, A Better Human Story. Thank you so kindly.
Thank you.
All right, folks, I got a poem that I want to recite from our one and only Tom C. Okay, I'm going to do it real quickly, and then I'll go ahead and check out some of the comments that I want to respond to. But here we go. Ron DeSantis is coming to town. Oh, you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Ron DeSantis is coming to town. You better not mask and never ask why. Don't get vaxxed. It's better to die. Ron DeSantis has come to town. You'll never need an abortion. The government says it so while Elon keeps his fortune. That's all you need to know. Oh, you better not sigh. You better not sue. You'd better not cry to the ACLU cause. Ron DeSantis is coming to town. He knows when you're sleeping. He knows when you're woke. He knows when you say gay or trans. Shut your mouth, cause it's no joke. He's making a list, checking it twice. You'll never be missed when you picked up by ICE. Ron DeSantis is coming to town. Best president he will be, won't run from leftist flights, has courage to be free, to take away your rights. He's meaner than Trump. He's cleaner than Pence. He'll never be a chump like rhinos on the fence. Ron DeSantis is coming to town. Those that seek asylum in Florida aren't welcome. Go back to where you come from or you'll end up lost in Boston. So don't you moan, don't you dare. Now you're sick and alone without medical care cause. Ron DeSantis is coming to town. Ron DeSantis is bringing us down. So you like your history classes where teachers help you learn, but Ron thinks you're leftist asses with books to ban and burn. The kids like Magic Kingdom. Their parents like to brag until the kids like Queendom and enjoy the shows and drag. Oh, you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Ron DeSantis is coming. Ron DeSantis becoming a clown. Is that great piece of poetry or what? Anyhow, let's see. Bridge MCP wanted me to put something on the screen. Here is what it looks like. Several pictures that shows you the smog coming over or the smoke coming over. Wow, that is tough. Okay, let's see what else Bridge wanted me to put up there. Let's see. What is this here? Para ver. Let's go ahead and see what it says here. Okay. All right.
Story about a guy and a term he likes to think he invented.
Really, the word...
Oh, it's too long for Bridge, so I can't get that one out. Paul Fleming think, Tom C., your poem is terrific. Bridge, I'll have to check that one out. That's 15 minutes. So we'll take a look at that another time. Let's see what else we got here. I think Rudnin had something. Let's see if Rudnin's one was quick. Para ver. Paul Fleming has one here. Let's see if that can be shown or not. Oh, Paul Fleming wants you to know that they arrested the woman who murdered that girl through her door. What else is there guys, if you need me to say something before we get out of here, put it again so it will show up at the bottom because you guys did a lot of comments, which I love, but I couldn't handle all of them. Tom C says, thanks for reading the poem, Egberto, Christmas in June. Yeah, but I don't know how to call it Christmas in June. I'll call it going to hell in June. Tom? Let's see. Rudnin says, yeah, the video I liked you too was 97 seconds. Put it back in there and I'll put it up, Senor Rudnin. All right, let's see what else we got here. Michael says, Egberto, please play this one from PBS. Okay, let's go ahead and get it. I think I got it now. All right. Yep, we got it. We got it. Oh, that's a good one. That is a good catch. That's a very good catch. Let's go ahead and play the one that Rudnan wants us to play real quickly. Here we go.
Some scholars have argued that the Bill of Rights is still flawed, that some of its provisions need reconsidering, that it's overrated. How do you respond to that?
As with anything in this life, it could be better here or there.
Like where, for example?
Well, that's a harder one to answer. If I were writing the Bill of Rights now, there wouldn't be any such thing as the Second Amendment.
Which says?
That a well-regulated militia being necessary for the defense of the state, the people's rights to bear arms. This has been the subject of one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word fraud, on the American public by special interest groups that I have ever seen in my lifetime. Now just look at those words. There are only 3 lines to that amendment. A well-regulated militia. If the militia, which was going to be the state army, was going to be well-regulated, why shouldn't 16 and 17 and 18 or any other age persons be regulated in the use of arms? The way an automobile is regulated, it's got to be registered, that you can't just deal with it at will. So someone asked me recently if I was for or against a bill that was pending in Congress calling for 5 days waiting period. And I said, yes, I'm very much against it. It should be 30 days waiting period. So they find out why this person needs a handgun or a machine gun.
Now, think about that, folks. That is a Supreme Court Justice burger. That is when Supreme Courts had some gravitas to them. That is when they really took their job seriously and weren't jerked around by the Federalist Society and all these other think tanks that are trying to turn us into a fascist state. And that's not hyperbole. That is, they're attempting to change us into a fascist state because as we become more democratic, as we become more progressive, where people say what they want or progressive values, the only way to counteract that is for the only undemocratic institution in our government, which is the Supreme Court, to actually tell all of us who want certain policies, no, you can't have it because we deem it unconstitutional. When I spoke to Dr. Schmookler, I'm serious. I don't see the purpose of the Supreme Court anymore. The Supreme Court is just no more than the fascist arm of Congress. In other words, 9 people deciding what we can do or not without any recourse. And as long as you have a government where there's no supermajority of any party, they get to rule and you can't do a thing about it because there's no way to get rid of them. All right, Bree says, Egberto, no time for Chris. Can you give link, please? Let's see. The link is already for Chris Hayes. For Chris Christie. I will put the link up for this particular program, in the blog for this particular program. I'll get the link up because I don't have it up yet. I just have it to play here. You know what? I can get it in. I want you guys to see it. It's only 1 minute and 13 seconds long. I haven't put any prelog or prologue onto it, postlog or prelog onto it. So here we go right this minute, my brothers and sisters. Here we go.
Years ago, he stood on the stage in New Hampshire and said he was going to balance the budget in 4 years. And he left with the biggest deficit of any president in American history. He said he was going to eliminate the national debt in 8 years. He added $3 trillion to the national debt in 4 years. Lonely, self-consumed, self-serving, mirror hog is not a leader. The person I am talking about, who is obsessed with the mirror, who never admits a mistake, who never admits a fault, and who always finds someone else and something else to blame for whatever goes wrong, but finds every reason to take credit for anything that goes right, is Donald Trump. It's not amusing anymore. It's not entertaining anymore. It is the last throes of a bitter, angry man who wants power back for himself, not for you.
I don't know what could be tougher than that. I don't know what could be tougher than that. He went ahead and he said it exactly as it needed to be said. And he needs to hammer that over and over and over. Trump will have his sycophants. There will be those that allow themselves to be snowed by Trump over and over again, that will allow Trump to rip them off over and over again. But most of us won't. But what we have to do is ensure that we have an alternative. Because absent an alternative, problems remain. Anyhow, folks, we are at the end of this show. I want to ask all of you to support the program. How can you support the program? Please support the program by going to politicsdoneright.com/support. At politicsdoneright.com/support has all the different options to support the program. Please do not forget to support. We are not getting the support that I thought we would for our trip to, we only have 4 supporters so far, only 4 names to put on those videos. Please, my dear brothers and sisters, consider supporting our program, our trip to Chicago for Netroots, where we're going to interview politicians and everybody else and bring it all to you. And everybody's going to see your names scrolling down as being supporters of our project. And what is it going to look like? Let me go ahead and put that on the screen for you. That is what it's going to look like. That's where we interview folks, get all the stuff done. So I ask you guys to support the program. I have it right there on the screen. Anyway, my name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. And you guys know how I end this baby. I am what? We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.